All right, welcome to today's webinar. We're going to continue on our discussion on some compliance topics. Today we're going to talk about PCI DSS 4.0 requirements. And I am Dustin Froyum. I'm one of the co-founders of VirtualZ. And today I have Vince Ray, co-founder and chief technology officer. Hey, Vince.
Morning, Dusty.
All right, so this is being recorded and will be available for playback on our YouTube channel as well as our podcast channel, which is called Skyward Data. And that podcast is available on all the typical podcasting networks. So check that out. We have all of our webinars on there, as well as some really great guests from the past as well. We're going to first talk about kind of the growing expectations for PCI DSS 4.0. And then I'm going to ask Vince to kind of talk a little bit about the architecture and the functional overview of PropelZ. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper into PropelZ and PCI compliance. Specifically, we're going to use Splunk as the integration point for this data coming out of the mainframe. But we'll talk about some other options as well. Then we'll play the demo of our integration between PropelZ and Splunk. And I'll talk a little bit about the pricing, and we'll get out of here. So first, let's talk a little bit about kind of the heightened expectations around PCI compliance. So what's really becoming very clear is that this needs to become more real time. So you're limiting exposures and potential damage if there is some type of breach. So continuous evidence collection with centralized repositories or logging of that data. Again, real-time monitoring and bringing really all of your PCI data together to monitor that. And so how do you really do that across all of your systems? Particularly, we're going to talk about how do you get your IBM Z data into some type of shared repository like Splunk for real-time monitoring. So one of the things we're going to show today is console message traffic that's coming from your mainframe and going directly into Splunk and doing that on a real-time streaming basis. And Vince will walk us through that, and we'll see, like I said, we'll see the demo of that as well. Really getting away from, manual integrations, scripting, those types of things. So you can really do this out of the box, no code, and get that data real time at a pretty low cost point, and really enable your observability across all of your platforms in an integrated fashion. So Vince, let's start with the basics of PropelZ, kind of the architecture. And today we're really focusing on the mainframe, but I think you'll walk us through how PropelZ has become multi-platform as well. So just so we have that context.
Yeah, and PropelZ is really easy to understand. It's, whether it's mainframe or anywhere else, it pretty much is the same structure. And the structure is really just three parts. The input stage connects PropelZ to whatever data you want to work with. Now, most commonly, these are files. These are application files. They're on the mainframe, they would be maybe VSAM files or sequential files or tapes or whatever you happen to have. But it's actually much broader than that. PropelZ can support anything you want to put into it. So, in the presentation today, when we start talking about PCI or management standards, what we're really talking about is not just files coming into PropelZ, but management data from a particular platform. So ZOS, console message traffic, system alerts, SMF accounting records. I mean, really, the sky is the limit. All of that kind of management data not just could be pushed into PropelZ, but it can be pushed into PropelZ generally in a real-time way. So as that data is being generated, it's going into PropelZ for further processing. So, that's the input stage. the heart of PropelZ, kind of the middle part that you see on the screen, is all about understanding that data. It's all about data transformation. It's about filtering. It's about understanding how complex that data could be, especially the mainframe data. If we look at, it could be anything. If we look at a file or an SMF accounting record, typically these things are very complicated. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of different fields. The fields are all sorts of complicated data types. They could be, in the simple case, they could be text. But if they are text, they're probably EBCDIC. If they're coming from a mainframe, they may be all sorts of different code pages. So even just understanding simple text is not trivial. But that's not a lot of the data that you're dealing with. A lot of the data is binary or packed decimal or mainframe format floating point, or all sorts of formats that are very platform specific. So a lot of what the challenge isn't so much just how do I get this data where I want it to go. It's how do I get that data into a format I can understand on other platforms. And that's what the heart of PropelZ does. We can take that input data, again, whatever the source is, and you can give us a little bit of metadata that describes what those records look like. And we can transform that data from simple things like databases and rows and columns in a database to JSON objects or XML objects or CSV format files. Really, the sky is the limit. So, and really part of that is the filtering that we can also do. You don't necessarily have to take all of the data. A big mainframe producing lots of SMF accounting data. I mean, that's hundreds, maybe more records per second being produced. You may not want all of that. You might just want the security violations to feed into your whatever you're using for security monitoring or intrusion detection. You might just want resource information. How busy is my mainframe over the day, or whatever it is. PropelZ can do that also. It can look at the data that's coming into it and filter it. And that could be really simple filtering, give me record type 37 or whatever it is. It can also be complicated filtering, wildcards and pattern matching and so on and so on. So that's kind of the core of PropelZ. And then we get to kind of the last piece of the puzzle, which is the output stage. And again, the typical thing that most customers talk to us about is, it's a file being read, it's being transformed into a more understandable format, and then the output is a database of some sort. And we use JDBC to talk to the database. There's pretty much any database that has a JDBC driver, which is probably 100 of them, can be the target there. And we'll take that data that started out as this convoluted BSAM file record, and we'll push it to, as rows and columns into whatever target you like. And again, one of the cool things about PropelZ is it's really flexible. What I'm describing is case by case. So Dusty could run that once with the data going to Oracle. I could run the same data into Snowflake or whatever you like that way. You can also do masking of the data, so again, maybe Dusty sees the full, maybe there are 1,000 columns in the table he creates, but I just need names and addresses or something like that. So, a lot of flexibility in what that looks like. And it doesn't have to be a database on the back end. I mean, again, that's probably the most common thing we talk about. But in the example we're talking about today, specifically Splunk, what we do there is instead of talking to a database backend, we talk directly to Splunk's proprietary API. So records come in, and the demo that Dusty mentioned is ZOS console message traffic. That data is transformed into a series of JSON objects. Those JSON objects form the input into Splunk's API, and then there's that real-time feed into the Splunk product as a result of those API calls. So really, any API could be used that way. It's you could think of it as a scriptable plugin architecture. So it doesn't have to be Splunk. I mean, we did a different demo, and Dusty, I don't know if we still have this one online, but we did one using the open source tools, so Grafana and those kind of products instead of Splunk. Same idea, console message traffic piped through PropelZ. The output is an API, but in this case, it's a completely different API. So, lots of flexibility there. So whatever tool you're using on the back end, especially in my experience, people invest in a particular management infrastructure. It could be Splunk, it could be Microsoft, it could be Broadcom, it could be, there are a number of, top products out there. And of course, that's what you want to integrate with. And, and PropelZ doesn't particularly care. It's just a matter of having that right back end to plug into it. So, that's really the structure that makes PropelZ suitable for management data. It's open-ended on the input side, so you can feed anything you want into it. And it's open-ended on the output side, so that data can, after it's kind of been rendered into an understandable format, it can go in any direction you need it to go. All right, Dusty, what did I forget to mention that I probably should have?
No, I think that was a great primer. I'm gonna press you on a few questions here in a minute, but let's just dive a little bit deeper into the PCI compliance, and I'll kind of ask a couple questions as well. So one of the things I wanted to ask about is kind of like the install config experience, really this no code aspect of PropelZ. Can you just kind of walk us through that piece?
Yeah, and that, again, that's a significant advantage of our product design. Everything in PropelZ is pretty much driven by configuration data. It's not custom code. So I mentioned the metadata. You tell us what your records look like. And certainly for things like we're talking about here with Splunk, we would provide that. But if you were using PropelZ with your own application data, it's just a matter of saying, here's something like a COBOL copybook that describes my records, and then we can understand that at a field by field level rather than as this kind of big unstructured blob. So, that's our goal, is that if you know what the data looks like, it shouldn't take you more than a couple of minutes to hunt down the metadata that's needed. And now, lo and behold, you're processing your records there. And, Dusty, I remember you and I talked to a customer who just couldn't believe that. They're doing what we do by hand, by building custom programs. And they're used to spending, what did they tell us, 6 weeks at least every time a new data source comes along. And they really struggle to get their heads around the idea of, you mean I could do this in 5 minutes once I have PropelZ up and running? So, but yes, that is, in the vast number of cases, that's absolutely true. The other thing too is that, and again, this is more specific to things like PCI and DSS. In a typical, and actually this is true on the mainframe. It's probably even more true on other kinds of systems. But on the mainframe, it's not like you have one mainframe. I mean, you might have one physical mainframe or a small number of physical mainframes. But within that, you might have dozens of LPARs. You might have virtual machines. You might have, all sorts of stuff running mainframes and producing management data that all needs to be funneled into, whatever tool you're using. So, it's not really just that well, it's easy to get going. It's also easy to scale. If I have 100 LPARs in my environment, uh, it's a really simple task with Splunk to make sure that all of the management data from all of those systems gets where I want it to go. And I don't have to invent anything kind of new and weird about that. I mean, all I really need to do is make sure, do I have connectivity from the LPAR to wherever my target is? And I run with that. There's very little more than that. So yeah, just being confident that you can look out over your environment and say, what, I've captured everything I could possibly need. And no matter what happens in my environment, I'm going to get the feeds that I need into the targets where I need them. That's a huge thing.
Thanks, Vince. So let's talk a little bit about security, and you've touched on this a bit, but obviously your PCI environments have a lot of sensitive information in them. And can you just talk a little bit about, one, integration of mainframe security, and then two, how PropelZ allows you to control the information that's really going out into the observability platform?
Yeah, so I mean, and you're right, we touched on a little bit of this, but um, PropelZ is doing what it does um, from ZOS. So that means it's really governed by your normal security rules. An end user with no particular privileges just can't pick it up and say, hey, let me see all of that accounting data. Maybe I could go dig out some passwords or whatever he thinks he can get out of that data. It doesn't work that way. He needs access permission to the source. And that's true if the source is, something like, management data, console messages, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of one layer of defense. The other thing I'll mention also is that, depending on what the target supports, we also do secure transfer there. So, in this day and age, most of the targets, whether you're going to Splunk or a database or anything else, they're going to support encrypted communications. They're going to support authentication. So I have to identify myself to push data into it. All of those controls are available to you as well on the output side when you start trying to put data in the target. So, and again, you're free to use whatever the target supports. Splunk will be a little different than, some of the other management tools out there, but they, all have this idea of, being able to do, security policy-based control over what data can get in, is it, protected as it gets in, et cetera, et cetera. So, and the other thing I'll mention too is that at large scale, one of the problems you have is just managing the transfer of management data. So, in other words, a simple network outage can wreak havoc with some of this stuff sometimes. I remember uh, in my past talking to a large US financial organization, and they're telling me about literally terabytes a day that they're collecting of, just audit trails.
Mhm.
So, when you're doing that spread out over multiple LPARs, maybe multiple data centers, it gets to be a real chore to make sure it's working correctly. And PropelZ makes that easy too. Unlike some of these other systems where the data might get moved from the mainframe to a mid-tier and then from the mid-tier to the management platform, everything we do is on the source system, on the mainframe in this case. So it makes it, if there is a problem, it makes it really easy and obvious that something's not right. It's right there in front of you. The messages, the errors from the target, whatever the symptoms are right in front of you, where they could be automated, they could be, escalated, and you don't have that. I mean, I remember horror stories of customers that would go sometimes days or weeks not realizing that the feeds they thought were getting somewhere actually were getting there. So, we make that part of the problem much more solvable as well.
Okay, thanks, Vince. I got a couple more questions for you as we kind of proceed. So, and actually, I'm gonna go back to this architecture slide. So Vince, the input and output through the JDBC, we call that kind of scheduled or it's asynchronous, right? But the feed we're talking about here is truly real time. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I would say it's real time in the sense that the message would be in Splunk at the same time it's visible on your ZOS console. There is a slight delay. It's definitely near real time though. And, just to put it in context, what a lot of customers do with this kind of data is you let ZOS log whatever it's logging, and then the log fills up, you spin off some kind of process that reads that log file and pushes it wherever it needs to go. That could be, minutes, hours, maybe days between the data being collected and it ending up where you want it to go. What we do is certainly not that. What we do, it might be milliseconds or fraction of a second between a message being generated and it showing up in Splunk, but it's certainly not a batch process that maybe runs an hour later or whatever it is. So it's very close to real time, and it definitely is visible in Splunk. And you'll see this if you watch the demo. It's very nearly real time in Splunk. You could almost use Splunk as an alternative to, let's say, a ZOS system console that your IT operations staff might use to kind of keep an eye on what's going on. They could almost use Splunk for that just as easily.
Yeah, so it's really maybe my language is a little imprecise, but it's really a stream, right? So as it's coming through ZOS, it's streaming out to that target through that process.
That's
Yeah.
correct. That's correct. And again, we've tested it with thousands of messages per second. Even in our very small environment, we have no trouble with that. So it's scalable as well as kind of stream oriented the way you're describing. And by the way, let me be clear too. I mean, in some environments, you might run, let's say multiple instances of Splunk. You might one for your dev and test environment that's different than the production systems. And certainly you can use PropelZ that way too. It's not that everything has to go to the same instance of Splunk. You're free to mix and match in whatever way makes sense to you. So yeah, I mean that's the flexibility that lets you keep up with the just enormous volume you sometimes see.
Okay. Well, that's a great lead in, Vince. Let's play the demo now, and then we'll come back and talk about a couple other topics and wrap up.
So I have a version of Splunk Enterprise, which is kind of the self-hosted version. What we're going to look at would work more or less the same way on the cloud product. And the idea is that really all you need to do is configure a connector that we can talk to from the Splunk side. In this case, it's just an HTTP endpoint. So we're going to go create one out here. You see, I've done it already. You can actually see the details here of how it's configured. The most important thing, and I apologize, it's small. It's probably hard for many of you to read, but the important thing is that port number and whether SSL is required. But again, you have the full power of the Splunk product, all of the settings that you might want to configured can be used here, and you get the same behavior from us as any other feed into into Splunk. So now I've got my Splunk environment configured, and literally what you saw is that's really it. So I'm going to move over to the mainframe side, and I'm going to just very quickly show an example of what I talked about before, that that PropelZ is a number of different parts. And again, the details of this aren't very important. But what we're doing here is we're using PropelZ, and then instead of connecting to a normal JDBC driver and database, we're talking to a component that knows how to invoke the Splunk API. So I just started it. It's running. It's accessing the ZOS console. You can see kind of some of the type of data that we get. You can see what we ultimately send to Splunk is a long list of fields that come from the message logs that we're seeing. It's not just the text of the message. It's where did it come from, what console, all of that kind of stuff. And as you can see here, we're able to, directly from ZOS, we're able to, send that into Splunk. Splunk does its normal thing and acknowledges the request, told us, with that very last line, you see that there was success. It was able to ingest that record properly. So now I can go back to Splunk, and I'm just going to do a really simple search here. I'm just going to use the name of that source we created and just query some records. And there's all the information that we've been sending to our Splunk context. You can see it's it's line by line. It's all of the fields that I described before. So if I need to see who is the individual user who did this, or what console did it come from, or which LPAR in my environment, it's all there, fully integrated with Splunk at this point. What that means is you can use all of these different fields for really anything that Splunk supports. You could build custom dashboards, you could generate alerts, you could generate notifications, you could do, I think of it as kind of a poor man's automation system. You see error messages, I want to, email someone in the IT community, or open an issue in my help desk, or any of that is possible with the integration that I've talked about. And again, this isn't quite real time. I had to go back and forth between the systems and do some of the things that we're talking about, but end to end, from nothing to having this running, was literally 10 minutes for me. So it's not, again, it's not the kind of thing that you're going to have to spend weeks or months figuring out. It's the kind of thing where you can try it, see the value, and you can spend your time and energy on what you do with the data rather than figuring out how to get the data there. You can put the brain cells into what kind of alerts do I want to generate, or what kind of notifications do I need, or what do I do in response to some of these messages that might flow through. And that's exactly how we want it to be. We don't want you to have to struggle with the basic nuts and bolts of how do I get the data there. So what we just saw is system logs, but generally just about any type of log data can follow that same model that you just saw. And I mean, we mentioned SMF here. We talked about that a little bit, but it could be other types of things. It could be, I don't know, CICS transaction journals, or DB2 journals, or really anything that you want. The event log from your security product, all sorts of things like that are usable this way. And again, the beauty of it is just how easy it is to do.
I know from my time at CA, we would often try to do these multi-platform things, and where we would usually stumble is that it was just so hard to get the right flow of data from mainframe applications that didn't really want to talk to other platforms into whether it was one of our products or competitors' product. I mean, it's hard, and there's heavy lifting there. We take that away, and we connect those systems together very easily, so that you can get the value out of those integrated multi-platform solutions with almost no work.
Okay, thanks, Vince, for putting that demo together for us. So let's just talk a bit about the PropelZ pricing, both base PropelZ, and then if you want this Splunk connector. So PropelZ overall is just a flat $50,000 per year, and that comes with our packaged JDBC drivers. There's 5 of them that are packaged today and generally available. And these are proprietary, very high performing drivers. Postgres, Oracle, MySQL, SQL Server, and Snowflake. So those are in that package for $50,000 per year, no data limits, no LPAR limits. We'll talk a little bit about some other use cases here that you could use PropelZ for. It's a very flexible tool. And so you can do all of those things as well. And I'll just note, right, PropelZ is multi-platform, so it is per OS. So if you have, you're running PropelZ on Z, that's $50,000, but you also want to run it on Linux as a data source as well, that would be another $50,000. So very, very cost competitive to enter the market or enter to get in on this product and get it implemented and being productive in your environment. I will note that price is good through the end of 2025 here. We are expecting an increase in January of 2026. So if you're interested in that price, please reach out to us. So in regards to the Splunk connector, that is another component and is just $25,000 per year. So combined, you can get what we talked about today from a use case implemented for $75,000 per year. So again, a very low price point to have this no code, easy to implement solution. And Vince, I know we're talking about some other connectors that have been requested to us. We expect that those input connectors will be similarly priced. But keep your eye open for those. And then, of course, if you want another target of some sort, we're happy to take a look at those. And we'll take a look at those and add them in, and we can price those out for you. They're probably not a very big uplift. We typically see those as $10,000 on the average, but again, if there's a particular target that you're interested in, please reach out to us and we'll be glad to take a look at those and talk about how we can make those GA in our package as well. Let's see here. So Vince, I wanted to talk about a couple other use cases as well as we kind of move forward here. So let me start with one question around our use case that we have today and kind of back to the pricing discussion a little bit. So what if their observability platform is not Splunk? Is that something we can address for them? What does that look like? Can they address that themselves? Can you just talk to that for a second?
Yeah, and by the way, I just want to stress something you said earlier. I mean, one of the other things about PropelZ is that most of the things we've been describing as connectors, I mean, that's open architecture. So, you can, if you don't like the way we do something or you need something that's not on our list, you are more than welcome to develop your own, or maybe you've already done something that you want to integrate with with PropelZ, that's possible too. So yeah, that's one of the other advantages here. If you look at the, just as an example, I mean, I see you have the slide up that lists the built-in databases that we provide out of the box. If you want another database, certainly we'd be happy to do that, work for you. But you're also welcome to bring your own JDBC driver, create a little bit of configuration data that tells us how to talk to that target, and we can use whatever you want us to use that way. So lots of flexibility there. The back to your point about other management tools, I mean, certainly what I just described is what we did. We took the core of PropelZ and we said, well, we need a custom input stage to get data from in this case, what you saw in the demo, ZOS console message traffic, and we need a custom output stage that knows how to talk to the Splunk API. Again, that's all open. If you wanted to provide your own at any point in that chain, you're absolutely able to do that. If you want to contract with us to do it, or and again, I wouldn't consider this, everything is done. I would consider it's early days for us. And as time goes by, if you give us a great reason to do, whatever, we'll probably find a good reason to plug it in. So yeah, very, very open that way. And, and just to go a little teeny bit deeper than that, many times, there are a number of different ways to talk to these management products. Splunk, for instance, instead of real-time calling the Splunk APIs, we could have just as easily used our JDBC interface to write data into something like a, let's say a MySQL database, and then had Splunk populate its information by reading that database. That's possible too. That's often there are many ways to skin the cat, and the best answer is really just going to depend on what your needs are, how much volume you've got, how close to real time do you want it to be. All of that starts to weigh in. And again, we're more than happy to step through the alternatives and come up with something that'll meet the needs that way. We haven't found an example where we look at something and says, geez, we just can't get that to work. So really, sky's the limit. By all means, challenge us if you don't believe me, and we'll be happy to put our heads together on something.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other use cases that you get with your PropelZ base license. So, one of the most typical ones is just how do you get data into your AI and BI platform? And so that's a very common use case item for us. One of the benefits of PropelZ in particular is that not only, just like kind of the stream that we've talked about for observability, on the database side, you can do that near real time, and you can do that in your online window as well because of the access methods that Vince has developed with PropelZ. And so you can do incremental updates. We have a customer right now that's really interested in the incremental update piece of what we do. And so you don't have to do a full, ETL process, like you do in your batch window. Typically, you can do that in your online window. So that's a great use for PropelZ. And then, one of my favorites that comes up is just tape migration, either for go forward storage or from just converting, old tape systems into a target database, typically stored as a blob. And some customers want both the blob and the data populated into a relational database too. So they have kind of both versions of it. And then it's some of that's just storage, right? And Vince, that's the one I wanted to just kind of piggyback on our topic today. We hear this pretty often is just, hey, I just want to store console messages or DB2 logs or SMF data as well. And so PropelZ is a great tool for doing that. And whether you want to go to, a private cloud or you want to actually go to a public cloud just for some inexpensive storage. You don't have to roll in another VTL system or buying physical, degrading magnetic tape or something like that. So some really great alternative use cases here for PropelZ on top of the observability. So Vince has got us lined up with 4 different products that handle just about any data access, data integration use case from your mainframe and now beyond with multi-platform PropelZ. And so, if you think you have a use case that is outside of this, we'd love to hear from you. Or obviously, if there's a use case here within it, we'd love to hear from you. So PropelZ, Flows, really easy backup solution. Going to the cloud or to SAN storage, Lozen, which is real-time read-write access with the mainframe remaining as the system of record, and then ZAC, which is even higher order storage product and data access product. So the mainframe as the client, but can operate in virtual tape mode or virtual disk mode. So very, very innovative product that way. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you and your particular data access or data integration use case. I'll just wrap us up. We've got tons of resources out there for you. So we have blogs on just about every topic. We have a customer briefing center that is on demand as well. Each of the products have demos, obviously on top of the one we showed today. We mentioned our podcast. We have an upcoming joint webinar with AWS that's going to feature Lozen and the integration with Rocket Enterprise Server. So we're really looking forward to that one as well. So check that out on our events page, or you can visit us at AWS reInvent here at the end of, I think it's at the beginning of December this year, maybe the tail end of November. Right after Thanksgiving is really the typical one for that. And we have our YouTube channel as well, so we can find a lot of resources there. Yeah, reach out to us at hello@virtualzcomputing.com if you have any questions or use cases for us. Thanks, Vince, for joining me today and walking us through what you've developed here for Splunk integration.